welcome to the You at Your Best podcast. I'm your host, Morgan. Before we get into the episode, let me give a little bit of an introduction for anyone who's new. If you like listening to someone process life in real time, or you are neurodivergent, an overthinker, a perfectionist, or maybe feel things deeply, this is the podcast for you. This is a non-professional, very human podcast about choosing authenticity over performance. My goal is to remind you to always come back to yourself. I talk about very deep things. I don't avoid vulnerability, but I trust you to know what resonates, what feels safe, and what might be too much for you right now. And I also share a journal prompt at the end of every single episode to help you think. So join me if you want to create a life that actually feels like you, so that you can become you at your best. All right, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. Hello, welcome back. Before I start the episode, I want to say that I have been processing a lot here lately, and I have been really overwhelmed from that, but I'm also feeling very grounded, so this episode is going to come from a grounded place. This episode is about feeling like your emotions completely change the room. How you feel is too much for other people, and maybe other people can't handle who you are, feeling out of place and feeling guilty, all of those emotions that come with feeling like you're too much. And lately, I've been sitting in that feeling really heavily. A recent example that I want to talk about is the other day whenever I was with my boyfriend and our friend Dylan and my daughter at the park. Through healing and burnout recovery, I have been getting to a place where it's really hard to pretend like I don't feel how I feel. And whenever you're so drained and so exhausted, you kind of start to realize that I don't have control over my emotions anymore. I can't force myself to just stop feeling how I feel anymore. And that can be really scary. And I want to add that if you are feeling like that, it is terrifying, but it's also a good sign a lot of the time. A lot of the time it's just simply a normal part of healing and a normal part of recovery. And that whole day I was feeling really disconnected and overwhelmed, and I didn't know what was going on. I was so confused. I was so scared, because it's like whenever you feel emotions so deeply, and especially whenever, I'm usually the type of person that needs to have a little bit of an understanding before I can let myself fully feel it. And whenever you don't fully understand what's going on, it can be really scary and really terrifying to just go into that emotion. But at the same time, I couldn't stop it from existing, which is a blessing and a curse. But they were skating on their skateboards, and I was just feeling so lonely. And a lot of the time whenever we hang out, sometimes it can feel like the moment is more for them and less for me, because their interests are different from mine. So then I just end up being the default parent, and I just felt so upset about that. But I also felt so guilty because I didn't want to take away from their moment together. And then I thought, why am I even here? I shouldn't be here. I'm a burden. I'm annoying everyone. And then while I was just walking around and they were riding their skateboards, I was crying. And I want to add that both of them are people that care very deeply about me. Looking back now, I feel so grateful to have people that care so deeply about me. And I was already so exhausted and so overwhelmed that simple moments felt like extreme disconnection, especially with Hunter. So he would just say something simple and I would just get so upset because I felt like he didn't love me or like he didn't care about me. And that's a weird feeling for me because I'm an anxious person, but I'm also a very avoidant person. So it's like a lot of the time my avoidance is more obvious than my anxiety. So whenever my anxiety is more obvious, I feel so needy and I feel like I'm just so annoying and I'm just irritating everyone and I'm just in the way and I don't matter. So that's kind of what was happening that day. And I realized that a huge part of what was happening wasn't just that I was experiencing really hard emotions. It was also that I was so overwhelmed and I was so self-aware that it was like I was watching myself do things that I normally don't do, like getting upset or acting more needy than normal. And I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, but it can also, the way that I was handling it wasn't fair to either of them. So kind of what was happening was I was trying to explain myself while overwhelmed. I was feeling guilty for needing reassurance. I felt really embarrassed afterwards. I was worried that they would rather I just wasn't there. And I was feeling emotionally exhausted. And the worst part is, despite this being confusing or weird, it wasn't a new feeling. It was my first time fully feeling it. But looking back, this is how I always felt. This is the deep emotion that is behind my anxious-avoidant attachment style. This is the deep emotion that is hidden behind my friendship struggles in the past and how I handle a lot of my relationships. About a year ago, I wrote out this really long prose poem, I guess. It was kind of just like a journal entry talking exactly about this feeling, but before I fully understood it. It's on my Notion page if you want to look at it. It's called Feeling Like You're Too Much But Not Enough at the Same Time. But basically, the main themes of that writing was growing up feeling like I'm too much, feeling like my emotions overwhelm people, learning to hide myself, hyper-independence, not asking for help, feeling deeply misunderstood, feeling rejected constantly, and feeling like vulnerability works for everyone except for me. Like somehow my vulnerability isn't the right kind of vulnerability. I kind of tend to question things and just have so many questions whenever I'm writing. So a lot of the things that I was wondering and genuinely so confused about are why does everyone else seem to know how friendships work naturally, but I don't? Why do I feel like I need to earn love whenever other people can just exist and they're loved? Why do I feel like I have to explain myself constantly just for people to understand whenever there's other people who don't even really have to explain and people automatically understand? And why does being emotionally honest feel so dangerous for me? And for me, what this feeling actually looks like, the internal experience, it kind of looks like trying to act normal while actually spiraling internally, intellectualizing emotions instead of feeling them, replaying social interactions constantly, isolating myself because being alone feels safer, finding that it's so hard to be around people because it takes so much mental energy, genuinely loving myself, but also feeling like I'm so difficult to love at the same time. It's such a weird combination. I love who I am and I love that I feel things so deeply, but at the same time, I feel like maybe other people don't love that about me. And whenever people don't understand what's going on in your head, sometimes they can make assumptions or they think that you're just being too much or you're too emotional. And I think that's the reason why I shut down my emotions for so long. And then wanting people to understand my depth, but feeling like they never will. And I remember situations with friends where I would be hanging out with them and it felt like they didn't understand that I actually am such a deep person. It felt like they only saw me as this emotional girl who wasn't aware of what was going on inside of her. And it's weird because I've realized that I have spent my entire life feeling like this. And that's why a lot of my coping mechanisms happened. This podcast actually started as a coping mechanism for that feeling like no one truly understood me. Maybe if I explained myself clearly enough, people would finally see who I actually am. And honestly, that did happen. People started understanding me more deeply in my personal life, and I'm really grateful for that. But I've also realized that there's a difference between expressing yourself to connect with people and over-explaining yourself because you're afraid of being misunderstood. Sometimes over-explaining isn't connection. Sometimes it's fear. And I think I've spent a lot of my life trying to earn understanding instead of trusting that the right people will understand me without me exhausting myself first. So that's something that I have been navigating the entire time I've had my podcast. So through all of this, I've realized that this feeling isn't happening because I'm broken. It's not happening because I'm bad or I'm destined to be alone or no one will ever like me. Maybe this feeling actually comes from pain, exhaustion, sensitivity, and being misunderstood for so much of my life. And I've realized that this feeling gets stronger during burnout or exhaustion, which means that this isn't my baseline and this is going to get better. And that having overwhelming emotions, feeling things so deeply, that is not a moral failure. There's a difference in using our emotions to hurt others and in feeling deeply. And I've had to separate those two things to understand that me feeling things deeply does not mean that I'm bad. My actions determine if I'm good or bad. And another thing I've realized is that people who love us are often a lot more forgiving than we think. Like with Hunter and Dylan, they weren't upset at me at all that day. They were just worried and moved on very easily. So that moment really helped me realize that I don't have to hide my sensitivity and I don't have to hide my emotions because I have people who care about me. And for people that are listening to this, even if you feel like you don't have people who care about you, you don't have to hide your emotions. You don't have to hide how you feel. You don't have to pretend like you don't feel everything so deeply because not everyone is going to understand you. Some people just don't experience emotions as intensely, and that's okay. But there's also a difference between people not understanding you and people dismissing you. Some people can love you deeply and still not fully understand your inner world. And honestly, that's really normal. Human beings can never fully translate their entire experience to another person. But the people who make you feel dramatic, ashamed, or like you have to hide who you are just to be accepted, it's okay to create distance from those people. It's okay to protect yourself from environments that make you feel emotionally unsafe because you're not required to shrink yourself just to make other people feel comfortable. And I think that's what I'm learning right now. Feeling deeply is not the same thing as being too much. Being overwhelmed does not mean that you're broken. Needing reassurance does not mean that you're weak. And being sensitive doesn't make you a burden. I think a lot of us learn to associate our emotions with shame because maybe the people around us didn't fully understand them. Maybe we were told we were dramatic. Maybe we felt responsible for everyone else's comfort. Maybe we learned to hide ourselves before anyone else could reject us. But hiding ourselves doesn't actually make the pain go away. It just makes us feel alone inside of the pain. And I know there are probably people listening right now who feel exhausted from constantly monitoring themselves, constantly wondering if they're being annoying, constantly trying to make themselves smaller, quieter, and more easy to understand. I just want you to know that your emotions are allowed to exist. And yes, a huge part of healing is learning to take accountability, learning how to regulate ourselves, learning how to not unintentionally hurt people when we're overwhelmed. But healing is also learning that the emotions themselves are not something that's shameful. You are allowed to feel deeply. You are allowed to need rest. You are allowed to stop over-explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And again, some people will never fully understand your inner world, but the right people will always care. The right people will still try, and most importantly, you can learn to stay connected to yourself even whenever you feel misunderstood. I think that's what I'm trying to learn right now too. And next week, I want to talk more about that, about how we move through this feeling instead of letting it define us. But for now, I just wanted to let you know that I understand and I know what it's like, and it hurts and it sucks, but there's always hope in everything. For this week's journal prompt, this one is going to be a bit of a harder one, but I want you to stay with yourself and stay with this feeling if you're able to. I want you to write about an experience in your life, maybe in your childhood, that made you feel like you were too much, or like who you are at your core isn't enough. It's a really weird feeling. It's like you're too much but not enough at the same time. So write about an experience of feeling that. Okay, that's all for today. If something in this episode resonated, share it with a friend who needs a little reminder that they're not alone. If you want more conversations like these, be sure to follow and rate this podcast. Downloading this episode is one of the best ways to help this podcast grow, so be sure to do that. If you want to find me on social media, all of my links are in my link tree in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next Sunday.